I'm Jackie Hudkins here together with my business partner Candice O'Neil, and we just received a phone call and an interesting question that comes up an awful lot, and that is, why is it important to have separate LLCs to run your business entity and then a secondary LLC to hold your real estate asset?
That's correct, Jackie. So often we'll have someone who will say to us, I want the liability protection of an LLC to hold title to my property, but I already have an LLC that's in existence. I would like to just put the property into that LLC. Generally speaking, not a good idea, because what happens is if you are ever sued, you're increasing the pool of assets that are available to a creditor in the event of a suit. So if that creditor pursues an action against you and they are successful, they are able to get all of the assets owned by the business. If the operating company also happens to own the real estate, quite often the real estate is one of the largest assets in the entity. So if you have them all in one pool, you're increasing your exposure. Whereas for a relatively minimal cost, you can have separate entities, one holding the operating company and one holding the real estate, and separate those assets in terms of a suit brought by a creditor.
I remember a story that you actually told me that occurred early in your practice where you represented a client that didn't come to you soon enough. I think they had 8 rental properties in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and all 8 rental properties were held in one LLC. One became vacant, a homeless person settled in, a fire started, and the individual died. And the Commonwealth attached all 8 of those pieces of real estate in one judgment against the owner. Whereas if he had separated each one in its own individual LLC, the liability would have been isolated to just that one asset.
That's correct. And when we see that happen, unfortunately, often the real estate is the primary asset of the individual that's come to us. So they are under the impression that they've sort of done the right thing, legally speaking, in terms of obtaining some creditor protection for themselves. But what they don't realize is that while they've separated themselves individually from the assets, they've put all the assets into one entity. So if there's a suit against that one entity, the majority of their assets are exposed.
So Candice and I both practice in New Hampshire and in Massachusetts. The filing fee to establish an LLC in New Hampshire is $100 to establish the initial filing, and then another $100 every year for the annual filing. It is a little bit more expensive in Massachusetts. It's $500 a year. There's a secondary piece that's very important, though. It's not just establishing your LLC. You should also have an operating agreement. Do you agree?
That's right, absolutely. So the actual act of setting up the LLC itself may seem like something that's doable for the average person that doesn't practice law. However, we would always recommend that you also put into place an operating agreement for the entity. It serves a multitude of purposes, but one of the major reasons to have an operating agreement is because it does bolster your liability protection. It's a factor in your defense if someone tries to argue that your LLC is not legitimate. And then another reason why that operating agreement is critical is because if something happens to you as the owner, what would you like to see happen to that property? Who is allowed to step in and take over, take control? This is even more important when we have partners. So when you have multiple owners of the entity, they may not want to find themselves suddenly in business with their partner spouse or other family members. And it also will keep the business out of probate, which probate is expensive and cumbersome and takes a long time. So the operating agreement helps us avoid all of that.
So in connection with Candice's commercial law practice, she's also an estate planning attorney. She and I collaborate routinely where I focus on a real estate practice exclusively. So the nice thing about working with the two of us is that our practices combine to offer a comprehensive representation. So we like to call it real planning. It's where real estate and estate planning converge. It's real planning.